This is A Line Around Your Thoughts, a podcast that centers on conversations with artists, writers, musicians, and creatives from around the Inland Northwest. I'm your host, E.J. Iannelli, and I am joined in the Rocart Media Studio for this episode by Greg Bem, the founder of Carbonation Press.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, welcome. So I reached out to you and was really keen to talk to you because I just became aware of Downriver Deep Root, which is a new poetry anthology that Carbonation has put out. And as eager as I am to dive into that, I feel like some backstory is necessary on Carbonation Press, which, if I'm not mistaken, is kind of timed with your arrival in Spokane proper now in 2023.
Yeah. Carbonation started as an idea as I was thinking about what it would be like to leave Seattle, where I was for 13 years, and move into a new space, a new place, and thinking about the concept of community, thinking about the concept of the literary relationships that I would potentially be leaving behind geographically, but also how that would change my way of thinking, moving and becoming immersed within this new space. So I'd been involved with different types of publishing, really low-key, small and independent press work for quite a number of years, almost 20 years, leading up to the formation of Carbonation. And I'd been working with a lot of different writers through a lot of different projects, including some that started their own books or started their own small and short-term publishing projects on their own. And it didn't necessarily feel like an impossible task, even though I had not run my own press before. I also was thinking about what could I do to keep my mind centering the literary arts that I know and love and have come to love and foster throughout those years in that place that I lived, Seattle, as I move into this new place and learn about this new place. How could this almost be like a foundation or an anchor to keep me on my journey as I experience many new things? And anytime I've moved into a new city, a new place, there's just that bombardment of distractions and radical shifts in everyday life, from living in a new apartment to learning new streets to understanding the nuances of the subculture of that place to making new contacts and developing friendships and all of the things about moving. And so Carbonation became this kind of keystone, if you will, in my mind, as a project that I could work on that could keep me going. And also probably manage some of my personal grief with leaving some of those friends and collaborators behind in the West. And so it started with me thinking, okay, if I'm going to put up books, I should think about who those books will be by. And so moving to Spokane, was also starting to talk to the literary artists in Seattle and in Portland and in other areas of the West that whose work I'd come to know, and started working on their projects. And so that's kind of why a lot of the earliest Carbonation releases are people from over there. And it's kind of a weird dichotomy or juxtaposition because most of that work was being done in Spokane. I had moved to Spokane when the press really started picking up. And I had started meeting all of these amazing writers and literary artists and other types of artists and amazing people out here, which, fast forward to this past weekend, we have seen the culmination of my connection to a lot of these people and more that have a relationship to this place. And so at this point, it's kind of the press is kind of this really interesting historical experiment in understanding place, understanding multiple communities at the same time, and, as I had initially intended, offered reflection into my understanding of what community even is, what relationships even are, how are we working together, how are we creating and building and making and experimenting together. And that's really, I mean, that's the core of what this press ends up being for me every day.
Well, it sounds like early on it was a way to maintain those ties or those links to your old life, but also a way of kind of accelerating the acclimation process here in Spokane, because by founding a press, you're going to begin making those connections fairly rapidly. People will come and find you because they have things to publish.
Yeah. And last year, a great example of one of those really awesome local contact connections was with the community schools, Wesley Shantz. He's one of the teachers there. And the first anthology we put out was this anthology, AI Ate Our Homework. And it's literally a student-based anthology. It's all student writing, but it's not just students who are embracing AI and using AI to generate their stories. It's conversation and deliberation and deconstruction of that process. That was the whole point. But Wesley had seen or heard of my press and reached out and said, hey, can we do something? I want to put out a book. I want these students' work to be seen. I want their ideas and these conversations, which are often so fleeting. I'm paraphrasing significantly, but the general gist was in the digital realm, work goes around in this kind of void, and how do we codify it in a book object and really show the students that it's like, this is their work, these are their voices, this is what matters. And so that was a project that was ultra local. I don't think we've sold a single copy of that book. We gave out a lot of copies to those students and their family, and within that aspect of the Spokane community and the potentially future writers, local writers of Spokane, have something else with them now, which is really sweet. But that's kind of also another part of Carbonation, which is the original idea of the output could be what I and the author or authors want it to be. It doesn't have to play into capitalism. It doesn't have to play into transaction. It is the representation of this creative process. These books are artworks. They're not objects with price tags. We do sell them because we need to make our money back, and I am not wealthy, for the record. I like to say that every time. Like I'm paying. Actually, I'm paying for a lot of these with my librarian paycheck. But yeah. So like that messiness and fluidity of what this press can do has been its power, has been its charge. And some folks don't want that. Some folks that I've worked with or reached out to, they are on a different path. They want something maybe bigger or more glamorous or more traditional in the context of capitalism. And that's fine. But the ones that I work with, those folks who reach out and do want to go down this path through Carbonation, every time it's amazing. It's just an amazing, uniquely personal and intimate, collaborative process from the manuscript to the book. Every aspect is just all about the work itself.
And I think you've made that MO quite clear in that it's a not-for-profit, and it's neither not-for-profit nor for-profit. And so I think you build it as a hybrid publisher, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I think that is all very interesting in itself. Like what is anything? What are these labels? I have a couple writer friends, including one who I've published through Carbonation, who actually considers the concept of hybrid publishing as a scam, and is like, I don't want this to be hybrid publishing. And I'm like, okay, then it's not. I don't have the vocabulary. I didn't go through a publishing course to be able to describe what this is. But what I do know is that we will work on this together, and we will do so ethically, where everything is transparent. The process, the work that's involved, the money that I literally have or do not have to make this or happen or not happen, all of that is always my intention is to make it as clear as possible, and with the personal aspect that I'm doing this because I want to help create these books for people.
Yeah, and in addition to the non-traditional, I don't know if it's necessarily anti-capitalist, but a-capitalist financial model that you've established, you also touched on something with the AI 8-hour homework, which is that in publishing these books, and again, if I've interpreted the mission statement correctly, it's also about contextualizing a lot of these works, and so it's not just in that case, it's not just the stories, but the conversations around those stories and images as well.
Absolutely. There's every work is different, so it would be hard to generalize. And I think, to be honest, when I look at the catalog and all of the releases that we've put out, which up to now are 20 author titles and 3 anthologies, 4 actually, if you include this new one. Each one has a very unique context, and it is built around the situation and the position and context, subcontext of whoever is working on the work. And each book also has almost its own kind of mission statement, or intentionality or goal, to represent not only its work, but to kind of capture those ideas. And in some cases, they're very poignant. They might be political, they might be social, they might be even more general than that. They might not have a direct connection to something that's going on right now in this specific moment, but they have a certain timestamp on them nonetheless. They're representing that moment in that author's life, or that work that that author wanted to put out that needed to get out for some reason. I solicited manuscripts early on, and I asked the authors, what do you have that just hasn't been accepted, either by you or a publisher? What's just the strange miscellanea that's in your drawer that you forgot about, or that's too, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes here, too weird? How can we think about giving life to this thing? And I say that in this weird connection to all these Frankenstein graphic novels I've been reading recently. But yeah, so like when I present the solicitation to authors that way, especially authors who have published multiple books already, their metaphorical eyes really light up and glow, because there is something about asking about things that have been either rejected or ignored, and really turning into that, to face that I think can lift a lot of us up. I have probably personally like 15 book-length manuscripts, some of which I just self-published like 15 years ago online, and they're available in Google Drive as like a PDF. And then some that are chapbooks that had like 10 copies, and then plenty that are just 200 pages, 150 pages of poetry or prose that are just sitting there. Mm. And so they're fine where they are, but what if we could build these things into these new manifestations, these books, and see how it works out?
Yeah, and it's hard not to think of any manuscript, poetry or prose. It's hard to think of that outside of terms of financial viability. I mean, that seems to be a preoccupation, and what consigns it to a drawer is whether or not it would be financially viable. And what makes it financially viable, it's any number of factors. Its accessibility, its relevance, all those sorts of things. But in kind of casting that aside and saying, let's not make that a direct consideration, but just the work of art itself, it seems that it's prioritizing something that a lot of folks who do have manuscripts in drawers would welcome.
Yeah. I'm a librarian, and I order a lot of books as part of my job. And some of them are direct requests from community. Some of them are fulfilling academic needs. I'm at a community college in Spokane. And some of them are what I or other people, book reviewers, other librarians, other editors, other people deem of quality or of note culturally for whatever reason. There's a gazillion reasons why I might buy a book, but I'll buy all of these books. And without getting too into the weeds theoretically, what my goal is that they are there for when the person who is going to read them shows up. And that may never happen, but that may happen today. Mm. And having that availability is really interesting. When I think about the press, there are authors who submit manuscripts, and there's a wide spectrum of authors in terms of how they connect to their work and share it with the world. When they send me manuscripts, some of them are really out there, and I love them for being that way. And then I get some that are not really out there, and I love them for being that way. And I know, going back to your comment, I know that some are going to be more accessible to the reader, to a larger audience than others. Mm. I don't really care. Like, if the author wants that, then we can talk about marketing and promotion and all of that. And we can talk about image, and we can talk about the identity of a writer and what it means to be a writer in a public space. And also, we don't have to do that. We can talk about the work as this thing that exists, and similar to my comment about librarianship and ordering books, we can just have the book available. And then maybe they will sit down and have coffee with someone and tell them about this cool book that came out that has 20 copies in existence. And that person will jump on the ability to read that book. Or maybe not. So I have plenty of copies from the back catalog that sometimes I'll bring them to like the Get Lit Book Fair or at some of these events, and I'll try to sell them, or I'll have them available. I won't actively try to sell any particular one. And they'll be available, they'll be on the table. And if somebody looks at the cover or picks one up or asks, what are these? I will objectively tell them about it. There's a chance they're going to love it. There's a chance they're not. And that's fine. That's kind of how it's going. The problem is, though, logistically, is I have a only limited amount of bookshelf space. And so as I have titles that don't go anywhere, I need to like find new things to do with them, which is interesting because as the catalog grows, the back catalog of the press, that in itself is like a body. The catalog ends up being this being, this creature of the press that is kind of like just made up of it's the sum of its parts, and it's made up of all of these individual titles. So it's kind of cool to see how it grows and changes in terms of its shape and size with each new book that arrives, and where there are links between the books. That's something I've always wanted to think about, is like, how can we have conversations within the press? How can there be themes and trends? I don't publish particular themes or topics. I don't have a goal in that sense. But when there is this person, for example, that's writing about Cascadia and the bioregionalism and the poetics of this place, and then this other person comes along and they're writing about their natural world, like, where is that conversation happening? And then occasionally we'll do book releases, and if they're virtual, we can bring those authors together, and it's pretty magical to see when their ideas, their minds coalesce through those book releases, those outputs.
Yeah, and even though commercial considerations might not be your number one or even number 5 priority, you still do, you are mindful of timeliness, because I think of Winter in America again. And this was something that I think you began soliciting submissions in November of 2025 or 2024. And then you scrambled to put those submissions together and get it to publication before the inauguration. And I think that was the first anthology, no?
That was the first anthology that that we started working on. Mm. It was an interesting thing. I think the AI one technically came out before, but the Winter in America technically started, the editorial process started, the call for submissions and everything. It all kind of blurs together. That was a really wild chapter. Have you ever worked with more than one editor?
I probably have. I would think that I would have blocked that experience out of my mind.
It's difficult. It's difficult in a really, really wonderful way, because editors, in my experience, are incredibly brilliant and they are incredibly passionate. If they're agreeing to edit something, if they're agreeing to serve in an editor role, they have agreed to put their entire aesthetic framework, their entire value system of writing forward. That doesn't mean they're always checked in. They could very easily be checked out, and sometimes other editors may result in that checking out. But like, those dynamics aside, the ideal situation is that you have this room, this proverbial room that's filled with discussion and engagement and sometimes arguing and so much energy because of those compliments and clashes of opinion of the writing. And the Winter in America group, similar to the Downriver Deep Root anthology group of editors, they're just so diverse in thought. The editors have such a wide range when you lay it all out, a wide range of interest and priority and history and their own relationships to not only writing, but to different communities and different voices and reasons for doing what they're doing. And when that plays itself out in the calling for work, and then the selection process, and then the curatorial and kind of design of the manuscript, it's incredible. It is unlike anything else. And so when you do it in a very short amount of time, when you do it in like a couple months, and it's supercharged because there is a deadline, or there is a perceived deadline, or there is this imperative that we need, we meaning the producers of the book, and or the literary community, or in the case of art, the world, needs this thing to happen, this event to happen, this publication to happen. The stakes are so much higher. And those editors for Winter in America were putting in quite literally 8-hour days. I know they were doing this because they would ask me to hop on a Zoom call in hour 1, and I would say I'm working in the library. And then 8 hours later, they would ask me, hey, can you jump on a Zoom call? And I'm like, I'm on the bus going back to my apartment. And yes, in 30 minutes, I'll be able to get on the Zoom call. So they were literally just sitting in there and grinding through that process. And it was incredible to watch. I am really grateful for each and every one of them. I'm also really grateful that I was not in that Zoom room for 8 hours, because that sounds like a different type of hell. But yeah.
No kidding. And so that brings us to the most recent, and I won't say anthology, I will say anthologies, because there are 2 anthologies that are being published almost contemporaneously. And one is Deep River Deep Root, or apologies, Downriver Deep Root. And this is a collection of Spokane-oriented poetry, very much associated with place. And the other one is We Are Axolotls, and this is a bilingual edition that's much more all-encompassing.
They're very, very different books. And before I talk about either of them, I'll just say that one of the interesting things about not following a traditional publisher model is that I don't have a traditional publisher schedule. And many small presses, especially in the poetry world, they'll have their spring releases and their fall releases, and some will have books here and there, but they kind of do things with cycles in mind, because it's really, really good for maintaining sanity to have organization and structure. And they're also like running a business. My process is way more organic and fluid. It happens as it happens. So for every person or author or editor that I work with, one of the first things I do is I say, there's no specific date this book is going to come out. I cannot give you that. I can give you a target month, and we will hope that everything goes according to plan, but there's too many moving parts to do anything more precisely than that. So what will end up happening is I will work on things in this kind of linear fashion. For example, I work with author X in the first month, and then start the journey, start that process, and then in month 2, the second author Y, will come along and we'll start working on something, and it may take X longer than Y to be complete. It may take Y not as long. It may take X longer. It can be any variation. And in some cases, some of these books that I work on with these folks can take a long time too, literally months and months and months. And that's from getting a first version of a manuscript that is supposed to be pretty close to complete to the final version of the book coming out. There's a lot that happens in between. That's how we kind of wound up with both anthologies, Downriver, Deep Root, and We Are Axolotls, coming out within a week of each other. Ideally, if it had been a little bit more sane, I probably would have spread them out a little bit more. It's also very challenging thinking about like social media and marketing to do things in these kind of clumps, but that's just kind of the way it goes sometimes. But they came out around the same time, and I'm grateful for both of them in very different ways. They're both, at the end of the day, wonderful books that have amazing voices and strong representation of different perspectives and ideas and relationships to place, relationships to writing, and I'm excited to see where they go, both of them.
And can you talk about We Are Axolotls, which in the bilingual is Somos, ajolotes. So can you talk about the kind of national scope of that and the cultural scope that you were hoping to get in there?
Yeah, so that book, We Are Axolotls, Somos, ajolotes, is a project that was conceived of and actually delivered to me in a complete manuscript, like without me being involved in the call for submissions or anything, by one of the editors of Winter in America Again, who is Dr. Gabriela Gutierrez Imuz. And Gabriela is a professor at Seattle University. She is incredibly connected to the Spanish-speaking world, as we describe in the description of the anthology, the Latine and Chicane world of writers. And she maintains connections across borders, across boundaries, with people in many different countries. And the idea of this collection is that it's capturing contemporary, living Spanish-speaking poets and their poetry in a bilingual way, specifically writers who are working and living today and writing poetry today who have spent time in the United States. Some of them are based in the United States. Some of them consider themselves from here. And then there are others who have lived here for various periods of time and have moved to other places or moved back to other places. So for me, this anthology was a really interesting concept because it was a concept that, similar to some of the other manuscripts from the individual authors I've received, it was conceived and designed, it was thought up by Gabriela before I got it. I didn't have to really ask about the process or contribute to the process of collecting work, or arranging work or selecting work or anything like the other anthologies. It is also really fascinating because, to me, it is a statement on inclusivity through poetry, especially during a time where exclusivity and the historic oppressions that we as folks of the United States deal with and think about or have had to endure in different ways, where this is directly responding to how it is now, how it is in our face now every day. And so I think it's a really timely release in a social context, and the poetry is incredibly diverse and beautiful, and at its core shows the lives and experiences of all the types of these contributors.
Yeah, and you say that, and so as I was describing Downriver Deeproot, I had a second thought and worried that I was giving it short shrift because its scope is no less wide. There are over 60 poets that are collected in this anthology. Their work is incredibly far-ranging. This anthology, I mean, just the breadth of styles of poetry is pretty remarkable. And then it also includes visual, image-based art as well. So yeah, there's quite a bit of variety in this one. Now, I in Sarah Rooney's intro, she talks about place. She likens the fluidity of Spokane and the Spokane identity to the river. And there are certainly poems in here that are very rooted in Spokane, but there are also poems that are a little more universal, I would say, even though they might, the memory that they might be capturing might have taken place in Spokane. It's a much more universal experience. So talk to me about maybe the place-based aspect of this anthology.
Yeah, well, it starts with me. It starts with my relationship to Spokane. The idea of an anthology that was based in Spokane is originally connected to my relationship to Spokane before I moved here. And I moved here in part because of the job at SCC, Spokane Community College. But I also moved here because I had maybe a half dozen to 10, maybe 6 to 10 experiences visiting Spokane over the years when I was living in Seattle. And there was always this fascinating, for me personally, fascinating image of Spokane as this place that I did not live in, and yet was entirely remarkable, entirely wondrous, without glamorizing Spokane too much. It was noteworthy. It was always a place that I found charged with energy, charged with people in life, and unfortunately in the shadow of the state's largest city, Seattle. I have probably countless people in Seattle that I know who have never been here, and some of which have negative stereotypes of Spokane and Eastern Washington in general. And so that's a very real stereotyping that continues to go on. Often it's incredibly irrational and unfounded, and there's just challenges with dealing with that. I can't say I never compared the two cities, but when living in Seattle, I always thought about Eastern Washington. I thought about how magnetic it was for me. And yet I didn't live in Spokane. And so there was always this kind of like otherliness to it at the same time, which offers a lot of complexity and interesting problems to work out around what are these places that we live near? Where do we visit? What do we get out of places that we visit? How do we relate to these places that we only pass through? That sort of thing. So those ideas emerged over the decade plus number of years I lived on the West Side. Fast forward to last year, and I was thinking about how can I, as a person running a small press in Spokane, create a book that is about /for/of Spokane, instead of just continuing to do these other books, which I cherish, that are filled with people that are not from Spokane. How does a local press do something local? And I knew that I wanted to do some exploration of a book or an anthology that could be rooted in place, about the place, of the place, etc. So those themes, those ideas continued to essentially stay centered, but they weren't actually identified as the themes of the book until after I reached out to a few people that I asked to help me with editing an anthology. And so the other editors that served on this editorial board, Margaret Albo, Asia Gover, Dorian Carajalios, Sarah Rooney, and Jesse Vasquez, these other editors and I had initial conversations around the type of book that we would want to work on together. And some other themes came up, and ultimately this sense of home and liminality and roots really resonated with every one of us. The more we thought about it, the more we thought about the challenges of the small city and how transitory so many people are that come here from here or move to here for all of the different reasons. Pre-colonial with the indigenous groups that have migrated through and to here for the river. Post-colonial with the industry and the train system, and now the military, and more recently the schools that are here, the jobs, and then now we have multi-generational family structures that are in place. And yet there's better jobs on the west side, so people want to get the hell out of Spokane at the same time. And then there's the boomerang culture, which almost every small city has, where people move back because they hate living in the big city, or they don't want to live in an expensive city like myself, and they find the attractiveness of a small city that's relatively accessible and relatively affordable really appealing. So there's all of these qualities and more. I'm only listing like the first 5%, none of the nuances. And so as we thought about it, we were like, okay, like there's a lot to dig into that, but how about we leave it at that, those themes, and we just put out a call and see what happens. And that's what happened. We put out the call, and we didn't really restrict it. And we said, you know, as long as you have some connection to Spokane and you have work that fits these themes, it can be whatever you want. And that can include any style of writing. It can include poetry, prose, visual art. It was listed as a poetry anthology, but personally coming from a multidisciplinary background where literally everything is poetry, I was like, just bring it on. You have collages, you have photos, you have images. Those can be considered. You know, you have prose poem, you have memoir, you have verse, whatever, that can be considered. And so being open both in form and in theme resulted in us getting a lot of submissions, almost 200 submissions, individual submitters. And the work that we got was incredible. As you mentioned, there's just such a huge diversity of the work that's in the book. We have over 60 contributors. There are a lot of folks that are currently here. They live here, they work here, they're from here or they're not from here. They lived here and now they're gone. There's a lot of folks that have very fond and or impression and what is the word? Strong impressions of the place from when they lived here. And they haven't lived here in decades, but they still have these memories of Spokane, and they sent us their work. And then there's people that live or have lived here and wrote about home in other places, which I think is really amazing.
Yeah.
Like if Spokane makes you think of home and is like a conduit for that idea, that's fascinating to me. Like that connects back to the boomerang folks that want to come back, or the people that want to be here. So those people that are living kind of like in these other places are like satellites, and they're like reflecting back the home culture to the homeland. It's really interesting. But then there's plenty of folks that also write about the transitory nature of Spokane. They write about the poverty. They write about the lack of opportunity. They write about the struggle. They write about how this is the United States. Spokane is not an exceptional place. We are dealing with all of the same structural issues that every other city is dealing with. And there are the inequities and injustices and extremes of living here as well. And we get some of the access to that as well, which is important. The book, which has a cover by the brilliant artist Party Krill, or Kate J. Reed, shows this natural image of a bird and a fish and lilacs, and another flower. I'm not sure which flower that is, but and it's like a wonderful image that invites us in. But I think it's really kind of, I don't know if Party Cruel is thinking of this, but it's almost like what's under the surface of the river is all the things that have gone through the river, all the things that are sitting in the river, from the rocks to the lime bikes, like everything that's like in there, that's absorbed by this living body, this fluid space, the river as the city as the river, etc. And that's what you will find when you open the book and you get into those pages and those poems.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention a few pieces specifically that actually touch on these themes that you're talking about. I mean, one, I want to make sure I get the poet's name correct. It's Joan Ivesey Fawcett, and she has a contribution, or they have a contribution, Homesick and Homeless, and they ruminate on the definition of home. And, you know, Spokane is among them, and LA is among them. And the poem itself reflects on these geographic distances and how far away home might be. And and it's nice to see these various places, because I think any of us, I know that you've had not necessarily an overly peripatetic existence, but you lived in different places. You're originally from Maine, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So, and I've hopped around quite a bit, and so I've lived in different places, and there's an element of home to each of these places, and every place that I've lived, there's a bit of me, that maybe still remains there, and so many of these contributions, like Homesick and Homeless. That is certainly one that reflects on this, but there are others that are so associated with memory. I noticed that childhood and memory was a recurring theme. So even though there were these kind of mnemonic vignettes that were expressed usually in the form of a poem, many of them weren't necessarily identified as having taken place in Spokane as a landmark, but you can say, I can see that happening here. Yeah.
And this is something that is really fascinating for me as someone who's recently moved to Spokane, is that the place of Spokane and my engagement with colleagues and friends here has been one that is filled with memory. One of the reasons why I left Seattle, and there's more than one. One of the reasons was that the majority of the places I came to love when I moved there in 2010, and especially in the first 5 years of living there, the haunts, the stomping grounds, the places that I would go on a regular basis, they were eradicated. They were just rolled over through through the development of the neighborhoods.
Can I ask where specifically? Was Capitol Hill?
Some in Capitol Hill, some in South Seattle. I lived in Columbia City, and a lot of places in downtown even, Belltown, Fremont, just places here and there that had events, had really great offerings to the literary and the artistic communities. They closed, and they just, they can't make it when the rent goes up and the city has grown and there's a gazillion other places that you have to compete with, and all of these, symptoms of the larger city. And one thing I've noticed since moving here is that often when people talk about Spokane, there's this loving and affectionate relationship to the memories of the place that are not just memories of the place, but they almost feel graspable. They almost feel tangible. This happens almost every time I hang out with someone on a Saturday night. We're going to a brewery or a bar or a cafe or a restaurant or something, and they're like, remember when this used to be this? And it was like 3 things ago. It was 3 businesses ago. Remember when the Iron Goat Brewery used to be in Chief Gary Park? And I'm just like, what? I can't even imagine that, because I have this relationship with this place here in the West End, West Central, or not West Central, but the West End of downtown. I'm like, this is amazing. And is this what is going to be my experience if I continue living here over time? The problem with being in a larger city that is large is that I feel like those relationships and those memories don't get as solidified and crystallized. And places just change so much faster. Places don't last more than a year. Places were never enjoyable to begin with, so why would you foster those memories? But people here, I've noticed, not everybody, but a lot of people that live here, they have these really visceral connections and these really vivid memories of the places that make up the city. And that alone is really brings me a lot of joy, and it inspires me to think about the nuances of the place and the relationships, not only to the businesses, but the relationships to living in this place and navigating and occupying and being present in those aspects of the city that probably have a lot of community and a lot of really cool actions and activities happening in them. I think it's way more palpable than other places I've lived recently. But
Well, this is arranged alphabetically by surname, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, the closing poem is Eric Woodard's Traces, which is a poem that he's actually discussed on this podcast. But yeah, this is about these places that are no more and that exist largely through memory.
the penultimate poem.
Penultimate,
the last poem
okay.
is A.J. the Wordsmith's Spiritual Shout, or Aj the Wordsmith. But yes, the Traces poem it's a fascinating thing to think about. Like, what is our relationship to anything in 2026? We have so much that can pull us away, and yet there's so much here that pulls us in. And at the end of the day, we only have traces because we are pulled in a lot of directions. But I think that this type of book and the works that are in here and other books like this are really they're really exploring that concept of liminality that I think is more pervasive now than ever before, because of the internet, because of a historical internet or an historical internet that is taking up so much of our time in our everyday life. We have committed as a people, a global people, to this abstract thing that exists and has now existed for decades. And that thing is filled with so much. A lot of it is great and a lot of it is not great, but it's there. And so what is our physical existence like even now? And how even this room that I'm sitting in, how is this going to impress upon me something? And how is what I see outside on North Monroe going to impress upon me? And where are all of the things going to be symbolic and supportive of me as an individual and the people that are around me, the people that are in the community here? And then, like, how does that weigh against how we're being pulled in all of these places? And Spokane is growing too. It's hard to deny that the things in Spokane itself are changing. And in some cases, that may or may be problematic. It seems like Spokane is endlessly sprawling, which is a whole other side conversation for another day. But like, how does that impede on this idea of roots versus liminality, versus the downtown core, the river, these specific neighborhoods, which in some cases are thriving and in some cases are not. Like, there's all these cool conversations that exist when we start thinking about the ideas that are presented by these poets.
Yeah, and as we feel, I feel like there is this acceleration toward a certain rootlessness, with so much unrest and so much uncertainty. I think it prompts a lot of the conversations that are present in this book, and a lot of the self-reflection and the introspection and looking for roots. And one of the pieces that struck me was Robert John Jensen, It's Unremarkable Roots. And he refers to a pale whiteness with no sense of heritage. And he's kind of lamenting not having being almost envious of someone who can lay claim to roots. Yeah, and feels quite adrift. So, yeah, this is another case where, as some folks are reflecting on their identity and identifying their roots to place, there are other poets who are grappling with the idea of, feeling a bit rootless, and then wondering how to make sense of that.
And isn't that fascinating in the context of our country? And isn't it fascinating in the context of the colonial and post-colonial situation that's here, that these questions need to be raised by so many? And it's a collective question, I think, that we're seeing, and we're seeing the unrest that is continuing to respond to the continuation and the more violent and brazen oppressive systems that are all around us, that are not new, but continue to flare up. So many generations and so many decades of this country's history have been able to sweep this question under the rug for many people, and also replace it with this kind of neoliberal commitment to work identity and how do we function as workers in this kind of global system. And that seems to have carried people along, including the oppressed, for many years. But it's a kettle that's boiling, and it's a pressure cooker. And I hadn't mentioned this yet, but one of the things that I hope to do with the press and this book and some of the other books that the press has put out is capture a response to the structural problems that are around us. A book can do that. I firmly believe that art is action, and that creating art is going to balance out the universe and all of the injustices in the universe. And it's done so in community. It's done so harmoniously with other people that also want to create and put out those pieces of work. So for every wall that goes up, the book is a bomb that blows them down, blows them up, So.
The book, and before we close, I did want to touch on another thing, which is alchemy, which will have taken place by the time this goes out, but I didn't want it to go without mention, because we have this, the printed matter, but we also have live performance and spoken word. And so I was wondering if you could talk about alchemy and this dance poetry collaboration.
Sure.
And then, how that fits into the larger series of monthly events that you do.
Yeah, so Foray for the Arts is the hopefully soon to be nonprofit, actually. We're working on getting that going. But the art series, the event series that one of the editors from this book, actually, Sarah Rooney, and I started 2 years and 2 months ago. Sarah and I met through the lovely Sharma Shields at Spokane Public Library. When I moved to Spokane, I reached out to a handful of people that I knew could connect me, and Sharma was one of them. And thank you, Sharma, if you're listening. Ever indebted for this relationship, because Sarah and I have been incredibly prolific in the events that we've run. Foray has a monthly series, monthly iteration of the series. We move around different businesses and public spaces. Some of the events are indoors, some of them are outdoors in parks, conservation areas. Some of them are in public library spaces, all over the place. And it often leads to really cool collaborations, performance collaborations like alchemy. So I should say Foray is multidisciplinary. It's not just writers. It's a lot of different types of artists, including musicians and comedians and visual artists, all sorts. And this dancer, Amber Hunxermeyer, who recently moved to Spokane, reached out to us wanting to collaborate and create a special Foray event that features a mix of writers in collaboration or conversation with movement artists. And so this event will feature those pairings. and how those so thinking about time travel, I can't imagine how they're all going to go. I don't actually know all of the writers or the dancers, and but I do know that there will be at least one piece that includes ambient soundtracks and abstract or experimental poetry and dance alongside it. That's going to be
That's
mine.
going to be, I was going to ask. Yeah. Because I know you have an experimental sound background as well. So,
Yes. So there will be that. The short of the long of it is, this is the kind of stuff that we live for with this project with Foray. We're always trying to expand our sense of what is and what is possible, and it's really only limited by the limits of creativity at any given time. We've done events at sunset at the Saltese Uplands. We've done events in the Spokane River at the Cove. We had literally poets reading like submerged up to their neck while the forest was on fire like 2 miles away, and they read about the burning of the land. We've had pieces that are performances in breweries. We've had performances right down the street at Lunarium, the tea shop. There's just like a ton of stuff that's happening. And it really is, in my mind, going back to this idea of roots, like a cultural phenomenon, not to be too glamorous about my work, but like that Sarah and I are trying to foster. We're trying to create something that is consistent, but also, always innovating, always growing, always changing, morphing, being something that can be more inclusive, newer, stronger in all of these different ways. And alchemy is going to be just another one of those, or has been just another one of those.
So now is the point when we would ordinarily move into the lightning round. And you said you'd been familiarizing yourself with some of the episodes. I don't know if you listened long enough to come to the lightning round.
I did.
But I was wondering if I could put you on the spot to read one of your poems from this collection. Like, would you mind doing that?
Sure.
I think it would be a nice close to that conversation about Downriver Deep
Is there a
Root.
specific poem you wanted to read?
I don't. I was going to let you choose. Introspection, I think, is the first one that you.
One of mine.
Yeah, one of yours.
All
Yeah.
right.
Or sorry, interiority.
Yeah, interiority. Let me grab that here. I'll read it in two ways. There's actually, there's endless ways to read a poem, but
I was kind of hoping you would make sense of it because it's a bit like
columns.
concrete poetry where, it's columnar, and I found that I was leaping from one side to the next, and then so I was reading as columns, and then I was also reading them as sort of interwoven. So
You're a fantastic reader.
Okay.
That's exactly what I would have hoped you had done. So this is interiority for Ruth, who is my partner. A subtle kick, dry heat, a taste, curling talons of a movement, city, across, chrome feather, forever new, city, bodies, fulfilling jaunts, bulged waters, uprights, turned pink, fulfilled self, bulging in summer, and on, seasons, it was beautiful, while making rice, and on, the sweat, she just slept, a city dried, And the second way, a subtle kick, a taste of a movement across forever new bodies, bulged waters, turned pink, bulging in summer, seasons, while making rice, the sweat, a city dried, a dry heat, curling talons, city, chrome feather, city, fulfilling jaunts, uprights, fulfilled self, and on, it was beautiful, and on, she just slept.
thanks for that.
Yeah.
So now we shift gears a little bit and leap into the lightning round, which always begins with an either or. So this one is specially crafted just for you.
Hit me.
Street smarts or book smarts?
In every one of the previous episodes that I listened to, people had like immediate answers, and I don't know. I think for me, the street is something that I identified with consciously earlier than the book. And what I mean by that is I read books really early on. I was really into like Goosebumps. I'd go to the bookstore and I'd be done reading the book like within an hour after buying it, as a kid. Went to the public library all the time. Books have always been in my life. But the connection to the street as a teacher, as something that will provide me with skills and knowledge to transform or move throughout the world, I think was probably sooner. I still have fond memories of Portland, Maine, and getting up to no good, but actively engaging and learning lessons that applied to my everyday life consciously before reading a book and saying, hey, this lesson in this book is going to really impact my life. That would come later in my 20s, I think. I would read philosophy, I would read novels, fiction, poetry even, and I would say, hey, this knowledge is something that I can wield, I can utilize in everyday life. But for at least 4 or 5 years before that, it was living out there on the street. And I don't mean like being homeless, but like living out there and like actually engaging in the street. So street smarts.
So you're going to land on street smarts. Okay. Yeah. I feel like as someone who does not possess street smarts, I would, that's the one I would go with, because that's the one I feel like, oh yeah, book smarts can possibly be acquired, but I find street smarts so elusive. So that's the one I would land on as well. Second question, is there something important that you have borrowed and not given back? Thinking of something that's in your drawer or on one of your bookshelves and you think,
yeah, I'm a librarian, so I don't want any late fees. That's a great question. I'm trying to think of, so there are, I don't remember the exact titles. I do have some books that I have borrowed by people whose friendships I've had with no longer exist, or people who have passed away. And again, I don't remember the titles of those books, but there are the bookshelf can be sometimes this archive or memory palace of former chapters. And what do you do with those things that you maybe should have given back a long time ago, but you'd never had the opportunity, never came to your consciousness. In terms of like actual individual object, nothing comes to mind, but I'm sure there's something in there.
Yeah. You'll probably uncover it in a crawl space somewhere and say, I borrowed that from somebody in Seattle, and they're probably looking for it.
Exactly, yeah.
What would your maybe family, friends, or neighbors be most likely to call on you for? So I'm thinking of like tech support or help moving, or even sage advice.
Sage advice. I don't know about that, but I think ideas for experiences. It happens less and less as people gain access to information really quickly, especially with Gen AI and search engines. But for the last like 25 years, I've had random people ask me for recommendations when traveling. And often it's very, very random places that I have been to. But I've traveled a lot throughout the last 25 years for various reasons. And I'll randomly get calls for, a restaurant to visit in this small city in the middle of the United States. Or I lived in Cambodia several times. So requests for like recommendations of things to do in Cambodia. The interesting thing about that, though, going back to roots of knowledge, is that, and also the tidbit that we talked about with Seattle changing, is that there's a lot of places that don't exist anymore. And what counts for authority and like knowledge that's relevant, sometimes that doesn't work out so well. So I'll have someone say, I'm going to this place, and they'll be like, oh, you have to go to this restaurant. It's like the best thing you'll ever. And then it's like, oh, it closed 2 years ago. And that memory is my own. And now I don't have a reason to go back to that place, or I have to go find something new. So there's really interesting dynamics of that. It's almost like it's a cause for grief. So maybe I need to like not appease these friends.
Or you just need to process it through another poetry anthology. All right. Finally, I have already touched on the fact, and you have touched on this as well, that you lean toward the experimental in your music.
Yeah.
What songs would be played on loop, or song would be played on loop in your personal hell?
Personal hell. Ooh, I like that. Let me think for a second here. The problem is I find really like the contemporary stuff that a lot of people hate, because it's like the hyper pop and like all that stuff. I find really fascinating. I tend to like deconstruct music when I hear it, rather than just say this sounds good or bad. Or, in the case of the ever popular I don't listen to country argument, what I like to do is like look up who the artist is and like what their background is. And if it's old country, it's a little bit easier to digest, and it's all pretty sad. And the newer stuff is lovey-dovey, but it's interesting to think about these individual artists. But going to your question, personal hell.
Yeah. Are there any songs that you have just a visceral dislike of?
I think some of the pop music from like the last 10, 15 years has been a little bit difficult. My friend Justine is not gonna like this, but I just can't dig Taylor Swift that much. Some of her newer stuff's okay, but like some of those like stadium ballad style stuff where you have thousands of people jumping up and down, like, and they know all the lyrics, I find it really difficult to connect to that. So probably those types of songs, that type of genre would be the ones that I don't want to listen to for eternity.
Okay, the stadium sing-along hits, yeah. Okay. Greg, I want to thank you so much for coming in today and talking about your background, talking about Carbonation Press, as well as going into detail on Downriver Deep Root. I really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's always a pleasure.